Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk to you guys a little bit about why it is important from a overall size, strength, performance, and safety aspect for us to go to at least parallel on any sort of barbell squat or any squat at all. So let me put on my +5 out of weaponsmithing, work on skilling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. And first I want to address the evidence-based community who look at a couple of these studies done that showed similar muscle fiber recruitments by going only to 45 degrees instead of 90 degrees on the squat. And this is why people need to understand that you've got to be careful with some of the evidence-based stuff that's out there when it comes to looking at scientific studies that people did to get their PhD finished who don't have practical knowledge or experience in the real world. Because quite frankly, I've seen a lot of the people who go do these studies and the researchers, they don't even know how to perform a barbell squat. They don't know how to program anything. Again, they're researchers first, biology background and going into sports sciences. They don't understand how these things are programmed. And so they looked at that and they didn't factor in the other factors with the squat. They only looked at things like quad activation and said, hey, you go to 45 degrees, it gives the same quad activation. So we don't need to go deeper. We don't need to go deeper. And in fact, a lot of field athletes, that's all we need. That gave us the maximum carryover that we needed for sprinting and jumping. What more does an athlete need? Why do they need to go all the way down? What they're not understanding is that there are other elements going on with the squat than just how the quads carry over to these things. First of all, which we'll get into next, but number two, they don't understand that that wouldn't be the primary lift you would always use to get that joint angle. We have other lifts that any good strength and conditioning coach is going to have anyone who needs to sprint or jump do. And what those lifts are going to be things like the power clean, the snatch, push press, right? Look at the knee angles on those. And those are all explosive lifts. Those lifts are all more explosive than the barbell squat. All of those have a higher knee angle. And the push press is actually found to give the greatest force generation in the quad as far as force production of any lift. I believe there's at least one study that demonstrated that. So that's what they need to be doing for those. They need to be squatting for overall development. Overall development, strength, joint health. And what we need to get into there is when we talk about this stuff, you need to understand that when we talk about joint health, you need to have big exercises in which you move every joint in the body through its fullest effective range of motion. And in doing that, that is how you maintain joint integrity. That's how you keep your joints strong through all their joint angles, because you don't get strength carryover from different joint angles. It's a transfer, but it's not 100%. So if you're sitting around doing half squats all the time, and that's what people do at the gym, tons of people think they're squatting to depth, and it's scary. Even with these mirrors and stuff there, they don't look at themselves, they don't film themselves, and I see people all the time who think they're going to depth when they are literally doing a half squat. I see people all the time in gyms who do a barbell squat, and they do a curtsy, and they honestly think they're going to depth, and they are literally 45 degrees from the floor. They could go another 6 to 8 inches deeper and still be above parallel. And we're not even talking about going into a full squat, which would be, ass to grass. So the situation as we have it is that a lot of people are half squatting and not realize it. Well, the problem you run into is multifold in nature. Obviously, number one, the immediate issue with joint health, we're not moving these joints through their full range of motion. We're also not getting maximum glute development. Right? And there's so many people out there so obsessed with glute special exercises and all this glute training, yet half these people are half squatting who are worried about this stuff. If your glutes are weak, that's going to carry over to every single performance element. Women struggle oftentimes to build their glutes. It's a big deal to them. Tons of athletes need more glute development. And I can assure you that for the majority of you guys out there, your butt's not going to get too big if you don't get fat. Right? You're not going to build the massive glutes you think you are building to a 400-pound squat. So they're losing glute development, they're losing strength carryover to other joint angles, and they're reducing overall joint health. Now the next two things to consider is the other problem. When you're dealing with partial exercises, there's this myth circulating out there that overloading an exercise by shortening the range of motion does more work. It doesn't. That's not the case. You're not overloading anything if you're using a leverage advantage to lift more weight. The muscles aren't doing more work. The problem we have is that joints can do more work. Joints will take a heavier brunt of the load when they're loaded up with a heavier weight. And I would tell people, yeah, we should oftentimes be working with the heaviest weights we can handle for an effective range of motion for a given number of reps. Right? We should be lifting with heavy weights if we want to get strong, if we want to get big. But we don't need to artificially inflate those by using cheating and leverage advantages and shortening range of motion just to lift more weight. That doesn't actually overload the muscles further. That overloads the joints. And by reducing the range of motion, what happens? Because you have a leverage advantage, you can lift a lot more weight. You can lift a lot more weight by only going down to 45 degrees versus going 90 degrees to where your hip drops to the knee or lower. And I mean, I see all the time, I'll see people who go in and they've got the pad on the bar and they've got 405 on the bar and they're doing these curtsy squats, and I promise you that's a guy who could probably only squat 225 tops all the way down. He's probably squatting almost double what he would be able to handle, and you see it. Well, here's the problem with that. Number one, we've got the recovery issue. We'll get to the knee health last, but we've got the recovery issue of the axial loading. We're all going to get stronger one day. And what you need to remember is that the more weight that you load on your spine on any given set, the more it impedes your recovery. Axial loading exercises produce usually the greatest results in performance. They usually give you the greatest results in overall muscle mass recoupment through the body, any big exercise that puts weight on the spine. The problem is that the more we compress the spine on every set, the deeper it digs into our recovery. So if you reduce the range of motion down so much on an axial loading lift that you could add another 100 pounds, you're going to have the negative recovery due to the compression of your spine, and that will be systematic in nature. You're going to have the extra inroads in recovery as if you were 100 pounds stronger than you really were. It's going to beat you up more, but you're not getting any additional muscle fiber recruitment to go along with that inroads in recovery. See the problem there? If you squat long enough, you're going to get strong enough to squat 400 pounds. But you don't need to beat your recovery up with 400 pounds when you can only squat 250. And that's rather the point that I'm making. It's going to give you slower progress. It's going to give you slower progress because your body is going to feel that you've loaded that weight on there. It's going to know that you've loaded it. Your spine is going to feel it. And it's not going to help you any more than had you used the lighter weight for the full range of motion. You're not getting a single benefit out of it. All you're doing is beating up your overall recovery. All right, that's wasted energy. Recovery is finite. We need to be using it to the best of our ability in the gym so that we can make the best progress possible. Furthermore, for the same amount of gains, you're just getting more beat up and more fatigued. That shouldn't be our goal. The other thing that you have to consider there is that at the joint angle, what we know when we talk about shearing stress on the knees, the most stress is put on the knee when you're at 45 degrees, right? So when you're up here like this and your upper leg, your femur is 45 degrees, this is where the most shearing stress is put on the knee. Well, what happens when you load up and do a squat there? When you bring yourself to a stop short of going all the way down to learning to sit back a bit so that you keep your knees back a little more, the knee slides further forward, which puts additional shearing stress on the knee. And because you can lift more weight, a person who might be doing 400 pounds on the squat, stopping halfway, who can only do 250 on the way down. So you've put another 150 pounds of stress on the knee that stops and exacerbates it at the weakest point in terms of putting the shearing stress on the knee, in which squats can damage the knee. You've created 3 different factors that are causing a problem because you are stopping at the point where you have the most stress on the knee instead of just passing through it quickly and getting back out of it. And by doing so, it pushes the knee further forward. you are dramatically amplifying with the heavier weight and the knee position. A half squat, you're dramatically amplifying the amount of damage you're potentially doing to your knee. And you're taking an exercise that, if done properly, done correctly, done full range of motion with proper loading and proper programming, should never damage your knees. Done this way, it can damage your knees. This is the reason squats have a reputation for destroying your knees. This is the reason, is people doing heavy half squats. Because it not only builds the joint health you want by doing full range of motion, it puts at least 3 times the shearing stress on the knee joint on every single rep that you should ever have when doing even a max squat in a competition. This is not ideal. So the reality of all of this is there is no reason for us to be doing partial squats. We need to all be doing full range of motion squats if our goal is longevity, if our goal is maximum strength, maximum development, the best recovery possible, and the lowest rate of injury and long-term damage to our joints. This is what we need to be doing. At a certain point, you've got to check your ego at the door, go all the way down, and squat the way that you're actually capable of squatting. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be squatting as heavy as we possibly can, but we should be squatting for the correct range of motion with good form, the heaviest weight that we can. Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.